I'm an entrepreneur who failed hard before finding success. This is a story of how I learned the hard way that success doesn't come in a straight line, and you need to be willing to lose everything to finally win. Grab some popcorn, because this is a long one. I was 22 when I decided I was going to build something. Not just anything, but something big. I didn't have any money, no formal training, and barely a support system. But I had a vision, and I was pretty sure that was all I needed. It all started when I was working a dead-end job at a call center. I was on the phones all day, selling insurance to people who didn't want to talk to me, trying to make enough to survive. One day, while on a particularly boring shift, I had a thought. I'd been hearing a lot about the startup culture around tech, and I thought to myself, if those guys can do it, why can't I? So I started researching. I devoured articles about successful entrepreneurs, read books, watched videos, and spent hours on Reddit reading through success stories. I knew the odds were against me, but I thought, why not give it a shot? What do I have to lose? At that point, I decided I was going to build a business. But what kind of business? The first idea that came to me was a tech product, something related to social media. It wasn't well-defined, but I felt like I could figure it out. I'd seen so many articles about apps that took off, and how they started with just an idea. That was my path forward. I dove into learning how to code. I'd never written a line of code in my life, but I thought I could just teach myself. It was all about perseverance, right? Well, turns out, I was in for a rude awakening. I spent the next few months bouncing between tutorials, getting stuck on every other step, and realizing that creating an app wasn't as easy as I thought. Around the same time, I started reaching out to potential investors, telling them about my big idea. Looking back now, it was embarrassing. I was this 22-year-old kid with zero real experience pitching something that was just a vague notion in my head. Unsurprisingly, nobody took me seriously. They'd smile politely, but there were no checks coming my way. I was persistent, though, and after a few months of research, I cobbled together a rudimentary prototype of the app. I paid a freelancer to help me with some of the coding, even though I couldn't really afford it. I had saved up a little money, but the cost quickly started to add up. I wasn't making any revenue, and I was using all my savings to fund this dream that was growing more expensive by the day. But I didn't care. I thought I was close to a breakthrough. I was wrong. I launched the app after 6 months of development, and it was a flop. It didn't work properly, it crashed frequently, and the user interface was a mess. No one downloaded it, and the few who did quickly deleted it. It felt like I had just poured thousands of dollars and hours of my life into something that was destined to fail. But here's the thing, failure wasn't the end of my story. It was only the beginning. I took a step back and looked at the bigger picture. I realized that I had focused too much on the product itself and not enough on the market. I didn't understand what people actually wanted. It was a hard pill to swallow, but I had to accept that my first idea wasn't going to work. That's when I decided to pivot. I started over. I threw out the app, and instead, I created a new business focused on helping small local businesses improve their online presence. It was something I knew I could do better. I had spent months learning about web design, digital marketing, and SEO while trying to build the app. I had a skill set that was practical, and I thought I could use it to create a sustainable business. I launched my new venture with zero budget and a ton of hustle. I started with local businesses in my area, offering them affordable website designs and online marketing packages. I didn't have a fancy office, no employees, just me working from my bedroom. I hustled like I had never hustled before, cold calling, sending emails, and knocking on doors. Slowly but surely, I began to get clients. It wasn't easy, and I made a ton of mistakes. One client asked me to redesign their website, and I ended up overcharging them by mistake. They weren't happy, and I had to offer a refund. That was a tough lesson in pricing and communication. But with each mistake, I learned and grew. Within a year, I had enough clients to start hiring a small team. I wasn't rich yet, but I was finally making money. I was finally getting some recognition. The business wasn't huge, but it was sustainable. I went from making $1,000 a month to $10,000 a month within the first year. Then, one day, everything changed. A larger competitor in the industry took notice of my business and reached out. They offered me a deal I couldn't refuse. They wanted to acquire my company. It was surreal. I had gone from a 22-year-old with a vague idea to a business owner with a legitimate offer to sell. I was stunned. It was the moment I realized all the failures, mistakes, and setbacks had been necessary to get to this point. If I hadn't failed with the app, I wouldn't have had the drive to succeed in this new venture. I sold the business a few months later, and I walked away with a decent payout. It wasn't life-changing money, but it was enough for me to pay off my debts and move forward. Looking back, I realized the entire journey was a learning process. The first failure, the second one, and every mistake in between taught me more than any success ever could. I still mess up, daily, in fact, but I've learned how to keep going, even when it feels like I'm sinking. Now, I'm working on a new project, but this time, I know better. I know that success isn't just about having a great idea. It's about being adaptable, learning from failure, and never giving up when things don't go as planned. So to anyone reading this who's thinking about starting something new, don't expect it to be easy, and don't think that just because you fail, it's the end. Failure is just the beginning of your journey. Keep going. You've got this. Thanks for reading. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. I was always that kid who was constantly tinkering with things. My parents used to joke that I was born with a screwdriver in my hand. From a young age, I would disassemble toys just to understand how they worked, and more often than not, I would fail at putting them back together. Still, that curiosity never left me. Growing up in a small suburban town, I didn't have much. My family wasn't poor, but we certainly didn't have the luxury of living extravagantly. We were middle class, and anything outside of necessities was a stretch. My dad worked as a mechanic, and my mom worked as a nurse, so work ethic was something that was instilled in me early on. I learned how to fix things, whether it was a broken faucet or my mom's car. I became that kid who was always helping my neighbors fix their lawnmowers or repair their bikes. The more I did, the more I realized that there was a sense of pride and accomplishment in making something work again. But I never thought it could be a career until much later. By the time I got to high school, I had grown an interest in computers. This was during the late 90s, and the internet was just beginning to take off. I had an old, hand-me-down computer that barely ran, but I spent hours learning how to code and build simple websites. I was obsessed with figuring out how websites worked, what made them tick, and how to create something from nothing. I started designing small websites for local businesses in exchange for small amounts of money. Sometimes it was just an exchange for lunch or a few bucks, but it felt like a huge accomplishment. After high school, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I didn't have the grades for a traditional college scholarship, and honestly, the thought of going to a big university didn't excite me. I opted to take a year off and really figure out my path. My dad suggested I go to a trade school to learn about electrical systems, since I was always good with my hands and enjoyed problem solving. But instead, I decided to pursue something that felt more aligned with my passion, web development. I found a local coding bootcamp that promised to teach me everything I needed to know to become a full-fledged web developer in 3 months. The price was steep, and I didn't have much saved up, so I took out a loan and went for it. The bootcamp was intense. There were days when I felt like I was drowning in code, and the pressure to learn quickly felt suffocating. But I pushed through. I loved the idea of creating something from scratch and watching it come to life on a screen. It was like solving a complex puzzle, and I was addicted to that feeling. By the end of the bootcamp, I had learned enough to get my first full-time job as a junior developer at a small startup. The pay wasn't great, but it was enough to cover my bills, and the experience was invaluable. I learned a ton on the job, from how to collaborate with a team to how to approach complex coding problems. But as time went on, I realized that I wasn't satisfied with just being another cog in the machine. I wanted more. I wanted to create something that was entirely my own. I started working on side projects in my free time. I would spend nights and weekends building simple apps, websites, and tools that I thought could be useful. At one point, I built a website that allowed small businesses to easily create their own online stores. It wasn't anything groundbreaking, but it was functional, and I put it out there for people to use. To my surprise, some businesses actually started using it, and I began to get feedback on how to improve it. The positive responses gave me a sense of validation that I hadn't felt before. I was onto something. After a year or so of working at the startup, I took a leap of faith. I quit my job and decided to go all in on building my own company. I had saved up enough money to survive for a few months without a steady income, and I knew that if I didn't take the risk now, I might never get the chance again. I started by focusing on small, niche software products that could solve specific problems for businesses. One of the first products I worked on was a customer relationship management (CRM) tool that allowed small business owners to track customer interactions and sales. I had no idea how to market it, but I figured I'd build it and see what happened. At first, nothing happened. I didn't know how to get the word out or how to find my target audience. I felt like I was shouting into the void. But then, I remembered something. When I first started, I was doing small web design projects for local businesses. Maybe I could use that same approach to build awareness for my product. So, I began reaching out to small businesses and offering free trials of my CRM tool. I told them I would help them set it up for free if they gave me feedback on what they liked or didn't like about it. Slowly but surely, more businesses started using the tool, and word of mouth started to spread. It wasn't an overnight success, but after several months of pushing my product and tweaking it based on feedback, I started seeing consistent growth. I began making sales, and eventually, I was able to quit my side jobs and focus entirely on my business. But success didn't come easily. There were countless sleepless nights, moments of doubt, and times when I felt like I was failing. There were months when I barely made enough to pay my bills, and I wondered if I had made a huge mistake. But eventually, things started to click. My product became more refined, and I learned more about marketing, customer acquisition, and building a brand. The feedback from my users kept me going, and I realized that the secret to success wasn't about having the best product. It was about understanding your customers and continuously improving based on their needs. Fast forward a few years, and my company now has a small but dedicated team. We've expanded beyond just CRM software and have developed a suite of tools for small businesses. We've grown far beyond what I ever thought possible, and while there are still challenges ahead, I can say with confidence that I made the right decision. Looking back, I realized that my journey wasn't just about learning how to code or starting a business. It was about resilience, persistence, and believing in my ability to learn and grow, even when things seemed impossible. If you told me 5 years ago that I would be running my own tech company, I would have laughed. But now, I'm living proof that it's never too late to take a chance on yourself. I'm grateful for every failure, every setback, and every moment of doubt because it's all part of the journey. And to anyone out there considering making a similar leap, trust yourself. The road is tough, but the reward is worth it. I had always been the kind of person who thrived on routines. My 9-to-5 job at a corporate firm was predictable, steady, and honestly, pretty comfortable. I never really thought about entrepreneurship, mostly because I was fine with the stability that came with a paycheck. I had a steady income, an apartment in the city, and every weekend, I met up with friends for a beer and some small talk. Life was good. At least, that's what I thought. It wasn't until I hit my 30th birthday that I started to question everything. That year felt like a wake-up call, a realization that I was just going through the motions. I had no real passion for my job, no sense of purpose beyond the daily grind. I had always thought about doing something else, something on my own. But fear kept me from taking any real action. I remember the day it all changed. It started with a conversation with my friend, Mike, over lunch. We had been chatting about our childhood dreams, and out of nowhere, he asked, "What's stopping you from doing something you actually care about? Why not start something on your own?" It was a simple question, but it hit me like a ton of bricks. Why not? What was really stopping me? For the next few weeks, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I started reading books, watching videos, and listening to podcasts on entrepreneurship. The more I learned, the more it became clear to me there was no magic formula. You just had to start, even if you didn't have all the answers. And so, I decided to take the leap. At first, I had no idea what I was doing. I was in my mid-30s, with no prior business experience and no network to speak of. All I knew was that I had a passion for tech and a deep interest in artificial intelligence. So, I decided to build a small startup focused on AI-powered solutions for small businesses. I didn't have a big vision or a well-thought-out business plan. I was just trying to get something off the ground. The first hurdle was money. I had saved up enough to last me a few months without a paycheck, but that was about it. My family thought I was crazy for quitting my job, especially when I had a stable income, benefits, and a comfortable lifestyle. Friends told me I was taking a big risk, and my inner circle was filled with doubt. Still, I felt like I had no choice. The thought of spending another 30 years in a job that didn't excite me was unbearable. So, I started small. I rented a tiny office space, which felt more like a glorified closet, but it was mine. I poured all my savings into the business, hiring a small team, purchasing equipment, and developing the first version of our AI software. The first few months were rough. There were days when I wondered if I had made a huge mistake. I remember sitting in my office one night, staring at my computer screen, feeling completely overwhelmed. I had no customers, no traction, and no idea how to sell anything. But I refused to give up. I kept pushing through, trying to learn from my mistakes and constantly iterating. The turning point came when I secured my first client, a small e-commerce store that was struggling to manage its inventory. They were hesitant at first, but after a few demonstrations and some tweaking of our product, they signed on. It wasn't a huge contract, but it was a win. That first customer proved to me that I wasn't crazy. People actually wanted what we were offering. From there, things slowly started to snowball. I networked tirelessly, cold-called potential clients, and offered free trials in exchange for feedback. The more I got to know my customers, the more I realized what they truly needed, and I fine-tuned our software to meet those demands. Word started to spread, and soon, I was signing deals with bigger clients. My team and I were working 12-hour days, but we were making progress. However, it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were constant challenges, technical issues, budget constraints, and the pressure to scale quickly. The stress was immense. I had moments where I questioned whether I could keep going. My bank account was running low, and I wasn't sure if we were going to make it. But every time I felt like giving up, I reminded myself why I started in the first place. One of the hardest moments came when I had to let go of 2 team members. They were good people, but they just weren't the right fit for the company. It was one of the most difficult decisions I had to make as a leader, but I knew it was necessary for the business to move forward. The emotional toll it took was significant, but it also taught me that sometimes, tough decisions are part of growing a business. As time passed, we started to see real success. Our revenue began to grow, and we started attracting attention from investors. By the end of year 2, we had doubled the size of our team and expanded our product offerings. We were no longer a small startup operating in a tiny office. We had moved into a larger space, and our software was being used by hundreds of businesses across the country. The real game changer came when we received an offer from a major tech company to acquire our startup. It was a huge deal, one that would change everything for me. But after all the struggles, the sleepless nights, and the sacrifices, I wasn't sure if I was ready to sell. I had poured everything into building this company. It felt like a part of me. In the end, I made the decision to sell. The offer was generous, and it gave me the financial freedom to pursue other projects. The company I built had served its purpose, and it was time to move on to the next challenge. The sale was bittersweet, but I knew it was the right move. Today, I'm working on new ventures and helping other entrepreneurs get started. I've learned that the path to success is never linear. It's full of setbacks, failures, and moments of doubt. But it's also full of growth, learning, and unexpected rewards. I may have started out not knowing what I was doing, but looking back, I wouldn't change a thing. If there's one piece of advice I can offer, it's this. You don't need to have all the answers before you start. Just take that first step. The journey will teach you everything you need to know. And if you're willing to stick it out, you just might end up where you never thought possible. In the end, being an entrepreneur isn't about having all the right answers. It's about having the courage to take the leap and figure it out as you go. That's what I did, and it changed my life forever. I've been an entrepreneur for the past 6 years, and the journey has been one of the most rewarding yet humbling experiences of my life. This is the story of how I went from a broke college dropout with no clear direction to running a profitable business that now supports a small team and is growing every year. It wasn't easy, but it's been worth every sleepless night, every failure, and every little victory. I guess I should start at the beginning. I was always a dreamer. In high school, I daydreamed about starting my own business, but it wasn't until after I dropped out of college that I actually started thinking about it seriously. I was 19, enrolled in a mediocre state school, studying a degree I didn't care about, and realizing that I didn't want to work a 9-to-5 job. But the problem was, I had no idea what I was doing. I dropped out with nothing but ambition and an old laptop. No savings, no connections, and no plan, really. But I had this gut feeling that I could make something work if I just tried hard enough. I tried a few side hustles before I found something that clicked. It wasn't until I stumbled upon the world of e-commerce that I felt like I found my calling. At first, it was a disaster. I tried dropshipping. My first product was a custom-made phone case that I was sure everyone would love. I spent hours setting up the website, crafting product descriptions, and running ads on Facebook. I was convinced that I was about to become the next big thing. But then crickets. No sales, no interest, nothing. I spent hundreds of dollars on ads, only to realize I was targeting the wrong audience. My product wasn't even that good. The phone case was cheap, the design was basic, and I had no real brand identity. That was my first taste of failure, and honestly, I was crushed. I thought I was done. But instead of giving up, I realized that I needed to learn more. I dove deep into e-commerce courses, YouTube videos, and podcasts. I read books about marketing, branding, and psychology. I studied my competition and tried to figure out what they were doing that I wasn't. Slowly, I began to see where I went wrong. It wasn't just about the product. It was about the value I provided, the marketing, the messaging, and the customer experience. After a couple of months of trial and error, I tried again. This time, I focused on a niche product, a custom-made skateboard deck. I built a brand around it, telling the story of how the designs were made by local artists and how the materials were sourced ethically. I ran targeted ads, partnered with a few influencers in the skateboarding community, and created an engaging social media presence. This time, it worked. I made my first sale, and then I made another, and another. By the end of the first year, I had made just over $50,000 in revenue. It wasn't a lot, but it was enough to keep me going. I reinvested everything into the business, new products, better marketing, and building a small team. By year 2, I had hired 2 employees to help with customer service and fulfillment. That's when things started to feel real. I wasn't just a guy with a laptop anymore. I had a real business. But with that came a new set of problems. The next big challenge was scaling. In year 3, I hit a plateau. I had a decent customer base, but growth had slowed down. I wasn't sure what to do next. That's when I made my first big mistake. I tried to expand too quickly. I launched a whole new product line, hired more staff, and increased my marketing budget. But I wasn't prepared for the added complexity. My margin shrank, inventory became a nightmare to manage, and customer complaints started piling up. I quickly learned that just because you're making money doesn't mean your business is healthy. I had to backtrack, streamline my operations, and focus on what worked. I cut out the new product lines and focused back on the skateboard decks. I made sure our customers were happy, fixed the issues with our shipping times, and improved our communication. I also learned to be more conservative with my marketing budget, focusing on organic growth rather than paid ads. By the end of year 4, we had grown to a team of 7, and the business was profitable. We were making around $250,000 in revenue annually. I'd figured out the balance between growth and sustainability, but even then, it didn't feel like I had made it. I realized that the hustle never stops. As soon as you reach one milestone, there's always another mountain to climb. And that's where I'm at now, still climbing. Now, in year 6, we've crossed the $1 million mark in annual revenue, and I've learned more about entrepreneurship than I ever thought I would. But it's still a grind. I still make mistakes, I still have bad days, and I still get overwhelmed by the never-ending responsibilities of being a business owner. But I've also learned to embrace the journey, the highs and the lows. I've come to realize that the true success isn't in the money, but in the lessons learned along the way. Some key lessons I've learned from this experience. 1. Don't be afraid to fail. Failure is inevitable, but it's also an opportunity to learn. My biggest mistakes were the best teachers. 2. Invest in your education. I've spent countless hours learning from others who've been there before me. You don't need a formal education, but you do need to educate yourself if you want to succeed. 3. Focus on customer experience. Building a brand isn't just about having a cool product. It's about making your customers feel valued and appreciated. The better the customer experience, the more likely they are to return and recommend you. 4. Work smarter, not harder. In the beginning, I worked 18-hour days thinking that hard work was the key to success. It turns out that working strategically is more important than working constantly. 5. Adapt and pivot. The market is always changing. You need to be ready to adapt and pivot when things aren't working. Flexibility is key to long-term survival. 6. Surround yourself with the right people. I would not have gotten to where I am without my team. Having a group of people who share your vision and are equally committed to the business is priceless. Looking back, it's hard to believe how far I've come. There were so many moments where I thought about quitting, where I doubted myself, and where it seemed like the odds were stacked against me. But I'm glad I didn't give up. If I did, I wouldn't be here today. To anyone out there who's starting or struggling, remember this. It's a marathon, not a sprint. Stick with it, keep learning, and you'll find your way. I still remember the day I decided to launch my first business. It wasn't some grand plan. nor was it fueled by years of experience. It was an impulsive idea that grew into a full-blown venture, and over the course of a few years, it taught me more than I could have ever expected. Let me take you back to the beginning. I was fresh out of college, working a basic 9-to-5 job in a cubicle at a marketing agency. I was doing what I was supposed to do, working hard, playing by the rules, and climbing that corporate ladder. But deep down, something was missing. The excitement of learning and growing seemed to vanish the moment I sat down at my desk each morning. I knew I could do more, but I didn't know what that more was. It all started one Friday night when I was hanging out with a few friends. We were talking about our dreams and ambitions, and naturally, we started talking about business. My friend Josh, who was a couple of years older than me, was already running his own e-commerce store. His success was impressive. He was always sharing updates on his latest products and sales numbers, which had steadily grown over time. He told me that the biggest thing was starting small, making mistakes, learning, and growing. He had been in the game for a while, and I admired his focus. But that night, something clicked. I wasn't going to sit around for the next 10 years hoping to get a promotion at my desk job. I wanted to create something of my own, something that would challenge me and give me the freedom to build on my own terms. The next morning, I woke up with a plan, or at least a vague idea. I had been thinking about a business that I could start with minimal capital. I didn't have much to my name beyond student loans, and I certainly didn't want to throw all my savings into something that might flop. I kept going back to one idea: custom clothing. I'd always loved fashion, and I figured there was room in the market for unique, customizable pieces that would let people express themselves. It was a niche I could potentially tap into. I spent the weekend researching. I started learning about print-on-demand services that would let me create designs without having to worry about inventory. My idea was simple. I'd create cool, unique t-shirt designs that people could personalize. I'd use social media to build a brand and target niche audiences, like pet lovers, gamers, and travelers, who wanted something more than generic mass-produced shirts. I didn't know what I was doing, but I figured I had to start somewhere. The first thing I did was build a basic website using a Shopify template. It took me a couple of days to set up, and the design was clunky. I didn't have any graphic design experience, so my first few shirt designs were laughably bad. But I wasn't going to let that stop me. I uploaded them to the site, connected it to a print-on-demand supplier, and then I shared the link on my personal social media accounts. I told my friends and family about the business, mostly for support, but in the back of my mind, I was praying that someone would buy a shirt. To my surprise, a couple of people did. It wasn't much, maybe 2 or 3 sales over the course of the next week, but it was enough to keep me going. I started focusing more on building the brand. I designed better shirts, began posting on Instagram, and worked on getting the word out. Slowly but surely, I started gaining traction. But that wasn't the hard part. The hard part was realizing that building a business was much more than just creating cool designs and hoping people would buy. The logistics, the customer service, the advertising, none of that had occurred to me when I first started. It was easy to make a t-shirt design, but making a sustainable business out of it was a whole different animal. I started running paid ads on Facebook and Instagram. Initially, I spent a ton of money with little to show for it. I was targeting the wrong audiences, using ineffective ad copy, and generally just throwing things at the wall to see what would stick. I lost money in those first few months, and it was incredibly discouraging. I felt like a failure. But then, I made a realization. I needed to stop focusing on scaling too quickly and start learning how to effectively market my products. I went back to the basics, read as many marketing blogs as I could, and watched countless YouTube videos on digital marketing. I even joined a few Facebook groups for entrepreneurs where I could ask questions and get feedback from people who were further along than me. It took time, but little by little, things started to click. I refined my ad strategy, targeting specific interest groups more accurately, and tested different ad creatives. I started paying closer attention to my website's user experience, optimizing it for conversions. I even reached out to influencers in the niches I was targeting and sent them free shirts in exchange for posts on their social media. Some of these collaborations worked really well, and slowly but surely, my sales began to increase. By the time I reached my first year in business, I had made enough money to quit my day job. It wasn't a lot, but it was enough to sustain me, and I knew I could grow from there. I worked full-time on my business, refining my designs, experimenting with new marketing strategies, and expanding into new product categories. My brand started to gain a following. I had loyal customers who returned to buy more, and I had a community of people who genuinely enjoyed what I was creating. However, there was still one big challenge ahead of me: scaling. I knew how to generate sales, but I needed to figure out how to scale without losing the personal touch that made my brand feel special. It was a fine balance between growing fast and maintaining quality. I hired my first employee, someone to handle customer service, so I could focus more on growing the business. Eventually, I brought in more help, including a designer and a marketing specialist, which allowed me to step back from the day-to-day operations and work on higher-level strategies. Looking back, I realized that starting my business was one of the most difficult, frustrating, and rewarding things I've ever done. There were days when I thought about giving up, especially when sales were slow or when I felt overwhelmed by everything that needed to be done. But every time I pushed through those hard days, I was rewarded with growth and new opportunities. Now, my business is thriving. It's not a huge empire, but it's a stable, growing venture that provides me with the freedom to live life on my terms. I've learned more than I ever imagined about entrepreneurship, marketing, and even myself. If there's one thing I'd tell anyone who is thinking about starting a business, it's this: don't wait for the perfect moment. You'll never feel ready. But if you take action, learn as you go, and adapt, you can create something truly amazing. It won't be easy, but nothing worth doing ever is. Here I am today, running a business I'm proud of, and I still can't believe how far I've come. I guess it just goes to show that the journey is as important as the destination. I grew up in a small town in the Midwest where everyone knew each other. My parents owned a modest hardware store that had been in our family for 3 generations. They worked hard every day, and while they never got rich, they lived comfortably and built a reputation for being reliable, trustworthy people. The store was the backbone of our family, but I knew from an early age that I wanted something different. I always had an entrepreneurial itch, even as a kid. I remember selling homemade lemonade on the corner of our street when I was 7, and by the time I was 12, I was mowing lawns and offering to wash people's cars. My parents didn't quite get it, why I always had to be working on something else, whether it was cutting grass or trading baseball cards. They'd always tell me, focus on school, focus on the store. But I was determined to carve my own path. After high school, I decided to go to college in a big city about 2 hours away. My parents didn't want me to go. They were comfortable with me staying close to home and eventually taking over the store. But I had other plans. I was going to make my own way, and for once, I wasn't going to live by their expectations. I chose a business major and was ready to absorb everything about entrepreneurship. I devoured every book I could find, took every business course I could fit into my schedule, and sought out internships with startups. It was during my second year of college that I got a taste of what it was like to create something from nothing. A close friend of mine, Jason, came up with the idea for an online marketplace that would connect local vendors to customers in our city. It was one of those classic light bulb moments. He pitched the idea to me, and I was immediately hooked. We started working on it in our dorm rooms, coding late into the night and staying up to brainstorm. We didn't have much, just a shared vision, a couple of laptops, and a small amount of money we'd scraped together from family and friends, but we were driven. At first, things didn't go as smoothly as we'd hoped. Our platform was buggy, we didn't have enough vendors, and it seemed like no one wanted to take a chance on us. I remember sitting in front of the computer at 3 a.m., completely exhausted, asking myself if this was really going to work. There were plenty of times when we wanted to quit, but we pushed through because we believed in what we were doing. After months of trial and error, the site finally started to take off. We got our first paying customers, and slowly but surely, vendors started to sign on. I can't even explain how exhilarating it was to see the numbers go up, even if it was just by a few. By the end of my junior year, our platform had gained traction. We weren't making enough money to quit our day jobs, but we were getting noticed by small investors who saw potential in what we were doing. Jason and I pitched our startup to a small venture capital firm that had been involved in some early-stage tech companies. To our surprise, they liked what they saw. A few weeks later, we had a small investment and the resources to grow. That was the moment I realized this was no longer just a side project. It was a real business. I decided to drop out of college after my junior year. My parents were furious. They didn't understand how I could leave school for something so uncertain, especially when I could have stayed and taken over the family store. But I knew that what I was doing was my calling. I didn't have all the answers, but I had the drive, the experience, and the confidence to make it work. The next couple of years were a blur. Jason and I worked relentlessly to grow the company. We expanded our marketplace to multiple cities, hired a small team of developers and marketers, and eventually became profitable. There were plenty of challenges along the way: hiring the right people, dealing with cash flow issues, learning how to scale, and handling the pressures of being in charge of a growing company, but we tackled them head-on. I learned more in those 2 years than I had in the entire time I spent at college. But I'll be honest, there were times when I wondered if it was all worth it. The business was taking up every ounce of my energy. I rarely saw my family or friends, and I was living off a steady diet of coffee and stress. I started to burn out. The dream of entrepreneurship had become a nightmare, and I wondered if I had made a huge mistake by leaving school. But then something clicked. I realized that the only way I could make it through was by changing my approach. I had to start delegating, trusting the people around me, and taking better care of myself. I hired a great operations manager who helped organize our processes, and we began to streamline our operations. I also made a point to take weekends off, which helped me recharge. The growth didn't stop. By the time I was 26, our marketplace had become one of the leading platforms in the region. We had raised additional rounds of funding, expanded to several states, and built a strong customer base. It wasn't the success I had envisioned when I first dropped out of school, but it was better. It was real, and it was all ours. I still remember the day we crossed our first $1 million in revenue. I called my parents, and while they still didn't fully understand what I was doing, I could hear the pride in their voices. Fast forward a few more years, and I'm now in a position I never thought possible. We're a profitable company with hundreds of employees, and we're continuing to expand into new markets. Our platform has helped thousands of local businesses thrive, and we're known for our commitment to supporting the community. I've learned that success isn't just about the money. It's about creating something that has an impact and brings value to people's lives. I've also learned that the journey of entrepreneurship isn't always glamorous. It's hard. It's full of setbacks, disappointments, and moments where you question whether you're doing the right thing. But in the end, it's worth it. Every challenge, every failure, every success has shaped me into the entrepreneur I am today. And while I've achieved a lot, I know that this is just the beginning. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that being an entrepreneur isn't about taking big risks. It's about taking consistent, calculated steps toward your goal and never giving up, no matter how difficult things get. I've been an entrepreneur for over a decade now, and looking back at my journey, I can't believe where I started and how far I've come. It's been a wild ride filled with unexpected twists, failures, and triumphs, and I'm hoping my story can help others who might be where I was all those years ago. It all began in my small town, in a family that valued hard work but not necessarily entrepreneurship. My parents worked regular jobs and always stressed the importance of having job security. I didn't see much of that growing up, but there was something about the idea of creating my own path that excited me. When I was in high school, I spent every summer doing odd jobs, painting fences, mowing lawns, anything that would give me pocket money. I didn't mind the work, but what fascinated me was the idea of building something from nothing. I'd hear stories of entrepreneurs who built multi-million-dollar companies, and I'd imagine what that would feel like. It was a dream, sure, but a dream that stuck with me. I went to college and majored in business, mostly because it seemed like the obvious choice. But even though I learned a lot about economics and business structures, none of it felt real to me. The textbooks and lectures didn't match the kind of hustle I wanted to dive into. By my second year, I decided I wanted to start my own business, but I had no idea where to start. One day, a friend of mine told me about an online marketplace where people were selling custom t-shirts. It seemed simple, so I figured I'd give it a shot. I had no design experience, no idea about what people might want, and zero marketing skills. But I wasn't going to let that stop me. I bought a cheap t-shirt printing kit from a local store, set up a basic website, and started selling. It was terrible. My designs were awful, and the website looked like it was made in the 90s. Still, somehow, I managed to make a few sales. I was hooked. But the real wake-up call came when I had to deal with customer service. Someone ordered a t-shirt, and it came with a print that was off-center. The customer wasn't happy, and I had no idea how to fix it. I remember sitting on the phone with the supplier for hours, trying to get them to send a replacement shirt. It was a mess. But that experience taught me one thing that still drives me today. It's not enough to have a great product. You need to have systems in place to manage customer expectations and resolve issues quickly. Unfortunately, my t-shirt business didn't last. I wasn't making enough money to cover costs, and my product just wasn't what people wanted. But I didn't give up. Instead, I took what I learned and tried something new. I started a digital marketing agency with a friend who had experience in SEO. We didn't know much about the industry, but we were determined to figure it out. We spent the first few months cold calling businesses and offering our services. Most of the calls ended in rejection, but a few were interested. The first client we got was a local restaurant that needed help with their online presence. We worked around the clock for them, building a website, creating social media profiles, and optimizing their content. By the end of the first month, they were getting more customers from Google searches than they had in the past year. That success gave us the confidence to continue pushing forward. We kept hustling, and slowly but surely, we began to build a client base. But then, just as we were starting to see some success, my partner decided to leave the business. He had some personal issues that needed his attention, and he wanted a change in direction. I was crushed. I didn't know what to do or if I could continue on my own. But instead of quitting, I made the decision to push forward. I took over the company and began to really learn the ins and outs of digital marketing. I devoured books, took online courses, and networked with people who were experts in the field. I worked 18-hour days at first, often falling asleep at my desk. My goal was simple: to be the best in the industry. After about a year of working solo, things started to pick up. My reputation as a digital marketing expert began to spread, and I started getting referrals. The business grew slowly at first, but then, once it gained momentum, it exploded. We began signing on larger clients, and by the third year, I had a small team working with me. I went from doing everything myself to learning how to manage people, set goals, and delegate tasks. The financial rewards were slow to come. There were months when I barely broke even, and times when I didn't pay myself at all. But the real satisfaction came from the work. Watching businesses transform after implementing our strategies was incredibly fulfilling. And as the business grew, I began to see that this wasn't just about making money. It was about helping people build something meaningful. Then, everything changed again. One of my clients, a fast-growing startup, came to me with a crazy idea. They wanted me to help them build an entirely new kind of marketing platform, one that would combine traditional digital marketing techniques with cutting-edge AI to deliver personalized content to users at a scale that had never been done before. It was risky, and honestly, I had no idea how we could make it work, but I couldn't say no. For the next year, we worked tirelessly on this platform. It was a massive undertaking, but the end result was revolutionary. The platform we built allowed businesses to create hyper-targeted content at scale, and it did so in real time using AI algorithms. It was a game changer, and within 6 months, it attracted major attention from venture capitalists. We ended up securing millions in funding, and the company rapidly expanded. At that point, I had a choice to make. The business was growing faster than I could manage, and I was starting to feel burnt out. I didn't want to let go of the company, but I realized I needed help. I brought in a new CEO with more experience in scaling tech companies, and I took on a more strategic role. This shift allowed me to focus on the vision and the bigger picture, while the day-to-day operations were handled by experts. Today, my company is one of the leading players in the digital marketing space, with clients ranging from small businesses to Fortune 500 companies. The journey hasn't been easy, and I've made my share of mistakes along the way. But every failure, every setback, has been a lesson that has helped me grow and evolve. I learned that entrepreneurship isn't about having the perfect plan. It's about being willing to adapt and keep going, even when things don't go as expected. Looking back, I'm proud of what I've accomplished. But I'm even prouder of the fact that I never gave up on my dreams, even when they seemed impossible. Entrepreneurship isn't for everyone, but for those of us who choose this path, it's one of the most rewarding experiences you can have. If you're thinking about starting your own business, my advice is simple: don't wait for the perfect moment or the perfect idea. Just start. The rest will come. I remember the first time I felt like I was truly living the entrepreneurial dream. It wasn't during a moment of triumph, nor was it after I made my first big sale. It was during the first real setback I encountered. It was a slow Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting in my tiny office, a cramped room in the back of a shared co-working space, staring at the computer screen. The inbox was filled with rejection emails and clients telling me they had decided to go in another direction. My startup had been running for 6 months, and to be honest, it felt like we were barely staying afloat. But that day, I learned something that would stick with me for the rest of my entrepreneurial journey. Failure wasn't the end. It was just a part of the process. Let me backtrack a bit. I was in my mid-20s, fresh out of college, with big dreams of building something that would last. I had always been fascinated by technology and how it could reshape the way we lived, So I thought the best way to make my mark on the world was to start a tech company. I had no technical skills myself, but I had an idea, a platform that would connect freelancers with small businesses in a more efficient and personal way. There were other platforms out there, but none that really felt human. I wanted to create something that felt less like an impersonal marketplace and more like a place where people could form meaningful working relationships. I convinced a few friends to join me. One of them was a brilliant coder who had a passion for building things from scratch, and another was a marketing genius who could make anything sound exciting. With our combined talents and my unyielding belief in this idea, we set out to launch our company. Things were going well, at least at first. We got our first few clients by cold emailing small businesses and offering them discounted services in exchange for testimonials. We built a simple website, crafted a solid pitch, and began hustling. It was exhilarating at first. We were finally out there, pitching our ideas, sending out contracts, making deals. But as we grew, so did our problems. Our platform was slow, buggy, and difficult to use. My marketing guy, who had an incredible ability to get attention, struggled to convert that attention into paying customers. The client feedback started coming in, and it wasn't positive. Some didn't like the interface. Others felt our platform was too basic compared to the bigger players in the space. There was no shortage of moments when I questioned everything. In one instance, we had poured all our energy into a single pitch to a large potential investor. We spent weeks preparing, refining our pitch, rehearsing, ensuring that everything was perfect. The day of the presentation, we were brimming with excitement. But after a few minutes of listening, the investor simply said, "You're not ready for this." That was it. There was no constructive feedback, no sense of hope or encouragement. Just, "You're not ready." I was crushed. It wasn't the first time we had faced rejection, but this one felt different. It made me question whether I was cut out for this at all. I spent the following days brooding over every mistake I'd made, every misstep that had led to this point. My co-founder, who had always been the optimist, tried to keep me motivated, but I felt like I was sinking. We had put everything on the line, and it felt like we were running out of time and money. But then something unexpected happened. One of our early clients, a small local bakery, reached out to us. They loved the idea of the platform but wanted a few changes. The client wanted a more personalized dashboard for managing freelancers, a feature that would allow them to see which contractors had worked best for them in the past and which ones they should avoid. They weren't asking for anything revolutionary, just a small tweak to the platform that would make it more useful for their business. At first, I wasn't sure we could make it happen. We were already stretched thin, and the last thing we needed was to take on a feature request that might slow things down even more. But I remembered the reason we started this company, to help people. So, I said yes. We built the feature for the bakery, and within a few weeks, they were raving about how much it improved their workflow. They even started referring other local businesses to us. That moment of success was the spark we needed. We began focusing more on our clients' feedback. Instead of trying to perfect everything ourselves, we decided to let them guide us. We started listening more closely to their pain points and building solutions that would make their lives easier. Slowly but surely, our platform became more refined, more focused on what our clients actually needed, not just what we thought they wanted. It wasn't a magic fix. We still faced plenty of failures along the way, but something had shifted. We weren't trying to build the perfect platform. We were building something that could adapt and grow with our clients' needs. Over time, our small client base grew into a loyal community of businesses and freelancers who appreciated the personal touch we offered. By focusing on quality service over quantity, we were able to carve out a niche for ourselves in an industry dominated by giants. As the years went on, our company evolved. We faced new challenges, hiring the right people, dealing with cash flow issues, scaling the business, but we had learned how to keep going, no matter how difficult things got. Every setback became a lesson, and every rejection was an opportunity to improve. It wasn't about having all the answers up front. It was about being able to pivot, adapt, and keep pushing forward. Looking back, I realized that the true entrepreneurial spirit isn't about never failing. It's about learning to embrace failure, seeing it as an opportunity to grow and improve. It's about keeping the faith when things aren't going your way and trusting that your perseverance will eventually pay off. There were many moments when I thought about quitting, when I thought that maybe this wasn't for me. But each time, I reminded myself that the path to success isn't linear. It's messy. It's filled with setbacks, bumps, and detours. But as long as you keep moving forward, you'll find your way. Today, my company is thriving. We've expanded to serve clients across multiple industries, and we've developed features that have helped thousands of freelancers and small businesses work together more efficiently. But none of this would have been possible if I hadn't learned to embrace the failures, the rejections, and the moments of doubt. To any entrepreneurs out there feeling like they're at their lowest point, I want to tell you this: don't give up. The road is tough, but it's not the end of the road. It's just a part of your journey. Keep going, learn from your mistakes, and keep building. Your breakthrough might just be around the corner. Hey, friends, if you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. I never thought I'd be where I am today, let alone on Reddit telling my story. It's not that long ago that I was just another guy trying to make ends meet, working a dead-end job, living paycheck to paycheck, and barely scraping by. But, like a lot of people, I had this itch, this burning desire to break free, to make something out of nothing. And while the journey was long, painful, and often humiliating, it was also the most rewarding decision I've ever made. Let's rewind to a few years ago. I was working in a cubicle farm at a mid-sized tech company. The kind of job that pays the bills but slowly sucks the life out of you. I was just another cog in the machine, answering emails, fixing bugs, and attending endless meetings where everyone pretended to know what they were talking about. The money was okay, but the job was soul-crushing. One day, I remember sitting at my desk, staring blankly at my computer screen when I saw an article about a guy who started a small online business from scratch and turned it into a multi-million-dollar operation. He was making money while traveling the world, living a lifestyle I could only dream of. At that moment, something clicked in my brain. I knew I had to try, but I had no idea where to begin. I didn't come from a family of entrepreneurs, and I wasn't some tech genius. I was just a regular guy with regular skills and a burning desire to escape my 9-to-5 life. So, I started with the most basic step: research. I spent countless hours reading blogs, watching YouTube videos, and listening to podcasts. I learned about dropshipping, affiliate marketing, digital products, and anything else that seemed remotely interesting. Every night after work, I stayed up late, taking notes and learning from people who had already made the leap. But even with all this newfound knowledge, I was still paralyzed by fear. What if I failed? What if it didn't work? What if I lost everything? These were the thoughts that kept me up at night. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was meant for something more. And so, after months of planning, I took the plunge. I decided to try my hand at e-commerce. I'd seen people selling products online and making serious money, so I figured I'd start there. But of course, like any first-time entrepreneur, I had no clue what I was doing. I spent weeks researching products, building a website, and learning the ins and outs of Shopify. I even spent more money than I should have on ads and fancy branding, thinking it would give me a head start. Then came the first lesson: things don't work out the way you expect them to. I remember launching my store, spending $500 on Facebook ads, and eagerly waiting for the sales to roll in. I imagined myself checking my phone every few minutes, seeing new orders pop up. I even planned how I'd spend the profits, buy a nicer car, pay off some debt, and maybe take a vacation. But the reality was far different. After a week of running ads, I had 0 sales. Nothing. Zilch. I was devastated. All that time, effort, and money down the drain. And what hurt even more was that I had no idea why it hadn't worked. I thought I had done everything right. I almost gave up right then and there. I'd heard stories of entrepreneurs who had faced failure and come out stronger, but it didn't feel like that was going to be my story. I wanted to quit, crawl back into my comfortable little cubicle, and forget about this crazy idea. But something inside me refused to let go. So, I did what any desperate entrepreneur does. I asked for help. I joined online communities, attended webinars, and reached out to other store owners. I learned that my mistake wasn't the product, my website, or even my ads. It was my lack of understanding of my target market. I wasn't connecting with the people who would actually want to buy my product. I knew I needed to change things up, but I didn't have much money left to experiment. So, I started small again. I focused on building an audience before pushing the sales. I started creating content, sharing tips and advice related to my product, and engaging with my audience on social media. Slowly but surely, I built a small but loyal following. Then, the sales started coming in. At first, it was just a trickle, 1 sale here, 2 sales there. But it was a start, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. That little voice in my head that had been telling me to quit was growing quieter. But the road to success is never smooth. As my business started growing, so did the challenges. Customer complaints, shipping delays, and inventory problems became a constant headache. I learned how to handle each issue, but it often felt like one problem would be solved only for another to pop up. There were times when I seriously considered giving up again, but I'd come too far to turn back now. Eventually, I started to hit my stride. I refined my marketing strategy, optimized my store, and built stronger relationships with my customers. The sales grew steadily, and so did my confidence. I began reinvesting my profits into expanding the business, hiring a small team, improving my website, and even outsourcing some of the work that was eating up all my time. At this point, my side hustle was no longer just a side hustle. It was my full-time job. I quit my day job, packed up my cubicle, and never looked back. It felt surreal. There I was, making more money than I had ever made in my corporate job, but now I was in control. Of course, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. There were moments of doubt, anxiety, and stress. But there were also moments of pure joy, waking up every day to work on something I was passionate about, creating products that people actually wanted, and interacting with customers who genuinely appreciated what I was doing. Fast forward to today, and I've built a business that I'm proud of. I've expanded into multiple product lines, hired a small team, and scaled the business to 6 figures in revenue. I get to work from home or anywhere in the world and spend my time doing what I love. The freedom is incredible, and I'm finally living the life I dreamed of back in that cubicle. So, if you're sitting there right now, feeling stuck, unsure of what to do, or scared of failing, let me tell you something. Take the leap. It's not easy, and it won't happen overnight. But if you keep pushing through the failures, keep learning, and keep adapting, you can build something amazing. Trust me, if I can do it, so can you. It's all about believing in yourself, taking risks, and never giving up. Yes, the journey is tough. Yes, you'll face setbacks. But if you stay persistent, you might just surprise yourself with how far you can go. Just like I did. Now, I'm not rich by any means, but I'm happier and more fulfilled than I've ever been. And honestly, that's worth more than anything money can buy. I was always the kid with big dreams, the one who couldn't sit still in class because I was already thinking about the next big idea. I've always had a problem with authority and the idea of working for someone else. That's how my entrepreneurial journey began, long before I even knew the term entrepreneurship. I grew up in a small town, and from a young age, I noticed that people were either working a 9-to-5 or struggling to make ends meet. I was determined that wouldn't be my future. My father worked long hours at a factory, and my mom had a small side business selling handmade crafts. I loved seeing her hustle, the way she would wake up at 5 a.m., make breakfast for us, then head to her workshop to create her products. The drive in her eyes, the passion for her craft, was something that stuck with me. But she never really grew her business, and that stuck with me too. I knew I wanted to make money, but I also knew I wanted to do it differently, more efficiently, and on a bigger scale. In high school, I started dabbling in small business ventures. My first business? Selling candy at school. Simple, right? But I quickly realized that even though candy is cheap to buy in bulk, the margins were still slim. So I tried selling other things. T-shirts, keychains, even phone accessories. I'd go on eBay, buy stuff cheap from China, and mark up the prices. It wasn't glamorous, but I made a small profit. Small profits were better than no profits, right? But it was during a summer trip to a larger city that I had my real light bulb moment. I was walking around a bustling street market and saw a bunch of street vendors selling custom-designed phone cases. They weren't doing anything groundbreaking, but their setups were efficient, their displays were sleek, and most importantly, people were buying. I remember looking at a booth with custom phone cases that had cool designs, and I thought, I could do this, but I could do it better. I spent the rest of the summer obsessing over that idea. I had no money and no real experience in business, but I had a strong work ethic and was willing to learn. I started researching how to design phone cases, where to source them, and how to market them. I spent hours on YouTube learning about print-on-demand services and Shopify. I didn't have the funds to start a massive operation, so I began small. I designed a handful of phone cases, created an Instagram account, and started posting. At first, it was slow. My friends and family bought a couple, but I wasn't exactly making waves. The turning point came when I started targeting niche audiences. Instead of just making generic designs, I started creating phone cases based on specific interests and hobbies. things that I was passionate about. I designed cases for gamers, fitness enthusiasts, people who loved dogs, and even people who were into vintage cars. I tapped into these subcultures online, joined forums, and engaged with communities. Slowly but surely, sales began to pick up. But there was a problem: fulfillment. The print-on-demand service I was using wasn't reliable. They took too long to ship, and customer service was a nightmare. I knew I needed to take things to the next level, but I didn't have the capital to hire a team or purchase a warehouse full of inventory. That's when I took a risk. I invested the small profits I had made into buying inventory up front, something I had always been afraid to do. I found a reliable supplier, built relationships with them, and started purchasing bulk phone cases. This step changed everything. Not only did I have faster shipping times, but I could also improve my margins. I was in control of my inventory, and for the first time, I felt like I was actually running a business. The brand started to grow. I kept reinvesting profits into better marketing, better designs, and more inventory. I even hired a freelance graphic designer to help with new case designs. But just as things were starting to take off, something unexpected happened. The market became saturated. Everyone was starting their own phone case businesses. It wasn't just me anymore. There were thousands of others trying to do the same thing. My sales began to plateau, and I realized I was at a crossroads. I could either pivot or risk losing everything I had worked for. I decided to pivot. I knew the product alone wasn't enough to stand out anymore. I needed a unique selling point, something that would differentiate me from all the other phone case companies. I started focusing on the experience, not just the product. I turned my brand into a lifestyle. I began creating content that resonated with my customers. I posted videos showing the design process, the behind-the-scenes work that went into creating each case, and stories about how my designs were inspired by my own life. I made sure my brand was about more than just the cases. It was about the community I was building. I also began expanding my product range. I added accessories like pop sockets, laptop sleeves, and even custom wall art. Slowly but surely, my business transformed from a simple side hustle into something real, something sustainable. I hired my first employee, someone to help with customer service and inventory management. And that was the moment I realized I was officially a business owner. Now, 5 years later, my business is thriving. We've expanded to other products, and we've scaled our social media presence. I still can't believe how far I've come. From selling candy in high school to running a successful online store with hundreds of products, I'm proud of what I've built. But it hasn't been easy. The late nights, the early mornings, the moments of doubt, the constant reinvestment, and the sacrifice, it's all part of the journey. Looking back, I realized that the biggest lesson I learned wasn't about finding the right product or marketing strategy. It was about resilience. Every time I faced a setback or a failure, I picked myself up and kept going. There's no magic formula. It's about persistence, learning from mistakes, and continuously improving. If there's one thing I'd tell anyone looking to start their own business, it's this: don't be afraid to fail. The path won't be linear, and you'll hit roadblocks. But with enough grit and a little bit of luck, you can make something real. It's never too late to start, and it's always worth it to follow your passion. That's how dreams turn into businesses, and businesses turn into legacies. I always considered myself an accidental entrepreneur. I never set out to start a business, and I certainly didn't plan on making it my life's work. I was the typical 20-something, working a dead-end office job that barely paid the bills, constantly dreaming of something bigger but unsure of how to make it happen. It wasn't until a moment of frustration, followed by a series of random events, that I ended up building a company from scratch. It all started a few years ago when I was living in a tiny apartment in a big city. I was working as a marketing assistant for a small tech firm. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the rent, and I had some great colleagues. At least, I thought I did. I'd come to realize that my career wasn't moving anywhere fast. My boss was a micromanager, and the work felt more like busy work than meaningful progress. My passion for marketing was slowly fading, but I had no clue what to do next. One day, after a particularly grueling week of mind-numbing tasks, I decided I needed a change. I wasn't exactly sure what that change would look like, but I was tired of feeling stuck. I needed a creative outlet, something that could challenge me and reignite the fire in my belly. That's when I discovered the world of online entrepreneurship. A friend had sent me a link to a podcast about making money online through digital products, and something clicked. The idea of working for myself, creating something from scratch, and having the freedom to build a business on my terms seemed like the perfect escape from the 9 to 5 grind. It was the freedom that appealed to me most. The idea of no longer being tied down to a boss or office hours was intoxicating. At first, I dabbled. I looked into dropshipping, affiliate marketing, and even tried my hand at creating a blog. Nothing really took off. I made some money here and there, but it wasn't enough to quit my job or take it seriously. But the experience taught me valuable lessons. I learned about the challenges of starting a business, the importance of consistency, and the need for relentless perseverance. It wasn't until one fateful evening that I stumbled across the idea that would eventually change everything. I had been thinking a lot about my struggles with productivity and time management. I was juggling a full-time job with side hustles, and it felt like I was always on the go but never making meaningful progress. I realized that there must be others who were struggling with the same thing, people who had big dreams but lacked the time or structure to make them happen. This got me thinking about creating a product that could help people like me, people who were busy but wanted to achieve more. I didn't want to create just another productivity app, because there were already a million of those. I wanted something different, something that wasn't just about time management, but about mindset and creating sustainable habits. That's when the idea for my company was born, a productivity system that combined habit-building techniques with practical tools for achieving long-term success. I knew I wasn't the first person to think of something like this, but I felt like there was a gap in the market for a product that was simple, effective, and focused on mental clarity as much as it was on task management. The first step was creating the product. I didn't have any experience in design or development, so I had to learn everything from scratch. I spent months researching, learning about UX design, and testing different tools. Eventually, I developed a digital planner that focused on helping users not only manage their tasks but also track their habits, set goals, and reflect on their progress. But the real challenge came after the product was finished. I had no idea how to market it or how to build a customer base. At this point, I was still working full-time, so I spent my evenings learning about marketing, building a website, and trying to figure out how to make people care about my product. It felt like I was spinning my wheels for months, but I refused to give up. Then came the first breakthrough. I had spent hours perfecting the landing page for my website, but I wasn't sure if anyone would even visit it. So, I reached out to a few people I knew in the productivity space, offering them a free copy of my product in exchange for feedback. One of them, a popular productivity blogger, took me up on the offer. She not only loved the product but decided to feature it in one of her posts. That was the turning point. Within days, my website traffic skyrocketed. People started signing up for the product, and I started making sales. It wasn't much at first, but it was enough to show me that there was potential. The validation I received from that one blog post gave me the confidence to go all in. I quit my job and focused on the business full-time. Of course, the journey wasn't without its obstacles. I made plenty of mistakes along the way. I spent too much money on ads that didn't convert. I created a series of products that flopped. I worked endless hours, burning myself out in the process. But with every setback, I learned valuable lessons. I learned how to refine my marketing strategy, how to create content that resonated with my audience, and how to scale the business. It wasn't until my second year of business that things truly started to click. By this point, I had a small but loyal customer base, and word of mouth was starting to drive new signups. I started building an email list and creating more content to help people improve their productivity. I also partnered with influencers and other entrepreneurs in the productivity space to expand my reach. By the end of that year, my revenue had grown exponentially, and I was able to hire my first employees. I never imagined that I would be managing a team, but the growth of the business made it necessary. I started hiring for marketing, customer service, and development to help scale the business even further. Now, 3 years after I started, I have a fully fledged company with a team of dedicated people who believe in the mission of helping others achieve their full potential. We've expanded our product line, launched a mobile app, and even hosted our own online courses. I'm not a millionaire by any means, but I've created something that gives me the freedom and fulfillment I always dreamed of. Looking back, I realized that the turning point in my entrepreneurial journey wasn't just the product idea, it was the willingness to take that first step into the unknown. It was embracing the discomfort, the uncertainty, and the hustle. Entrepreneurship isn't easy, but the rewards are worth it. If there's one thing I've learned from this journey, it's that success doesn't come overnight. It takes persistence, resilience, and the willingness to learn from failure. But most importantly, it takes the courage to start. About 5 years ago, I started a business that went from a broken-down garage to a seven-figure exit. It wasn't flashy. No VCs, no fast-scaling tech, no crypto or SaaS. I sold coffee, but not in the way you're thinking. Let me tell you how a former delivery driver ended up running a caffeine empire with 22 employees and a warehouse before deciding to walk away with enough money to never work a 9 to 5 again. Back in 2018, I was delivering for Amazon Flex and Postmates while couch surfing. My girlfriend had just dumped me. My car had 170K miles, and I had no degree. I used to listen to audiobooks while driving, entrepreneurship stuff mostly. I was constantly broke, but I paid attention to little things. One day, I delivered a package to a guy with this weird-looking espresso machine. He opened the door while I was walking away and said, "You into coffee?" I mumbled, "Yeah, kind of," and he said, "Come back if you ever want to try real stuff." I did. A week later, he was this ex-barista turned engineer who had built a Frankenstein espresso setup that cost more than my car. I learned more in 3 hours from that dude than in years of drinking Starbucks. I went home obsessed. Fast forward a few months. I started going to thrift stores looking for old coffee equipment. I'd flip used grinders and espresso machines on eBay. Sometimes I made $30, sometimes $200. I learned to test them, decal them, clean them up. Eventually, I started putting in bids at restaurant auctions and estate sales. By the start of 2019, I had scraped together about $8,000, enough to rent a 300 square foot garage unit. This was my warehouse. I bought a label printer, built a simple Shopify store, and focused on refurbished equipment. My average item sold for $350. I wasn't getting rich, but the margins were better than delivery driving, and I was sleeping in a friend's converted den rent-free. Here's where things got interesting. I started including a little handwritten note with each grinder or machine. Nothing major. Just a, "Thanks for giving this equipment a second life. I hope it fuels some damn good mornings." People loved it. Some would email me back. One guy sent me a photo of his kitchen setup with my grinder and said, "You should sell beans too." I didn't know anything about beans. So I emailed a dozen local roasters pretending I was starting a cafe and asked if I could sample their wholesale beans. Only 2 responded. One of them, this guy Jake, said I could come by his roastery. He was in his 30s, working out of a warehouse that smelled like heaven. I told him the truth, that I sold equipment and wanted to offer beans as an upsell. He didn't laugh. He offered to private label some blends for me. So now I had beans. My new business model became refurb equipment plus 12-ounce bag of beans plus note equals value bundle. Shopify sales doubled in 2 months. I hired my first employee, a friend who was between jobs, to help with packing and shipping. We listened to podcasts and packed boxes until 1 a.m. most nights. Then COVID hit. And ironically, it changed everything. Everyone was suddenly stuck at home, bored, and flush with stimulus checks. Home brewing became a full-blown obsession for the masses. Prices of espresso machines exploded on eBay. I was flipping machines I'd bought for $200 for over $1,000. We couldn't keep inventory in stock. I upgraded to a 2,000 square foot warehouse in May 2020. By then, I had 5 employees. I was refurbishing 40 to 50 units a week and selling beans like crazy. I added a subscription option, and within 3 months, 1,400 people were getting coffee delivered monthly with their name on the label. I didn't do paid ads. Just Instagram reels of our refurb process, side-by-side shots of dirty versus restored gear, and the occasional meme. By the end of 2020, we crossed $1.1 million in revenue. But scaling up wasn't easy. I had to get serious. I hired a real operations manager, Xuline, someone to handle customer service, and an in-house technician. I streamlined sourcing, negotiated exclusives with restaurant auctioneers, and invested in custom packaging. I took no salary and lived off $2,500/month while paying everyone else more than I made. In 2021, we got approached by a regional kitchenware chain that wanted to carry our beans and refurbished grinders in-store. That deal took 6 months of negotiation, insurance, and compliance hoops. But it got us into 13 physical stores and pushed our brand visibility into orbit. We did $2.8 million that year. Then came the copycats. Suddenly, 5 other Shopify stores popped up with similar vibes. One even stole our product photos. I was pissed, but also kind of honored. It validated the niche. I focused harder on branding. I hired a creative agency to help rework our visuals, and I built a loyalty program called Second Shot Club. We sent anniversary notes to repeat customers, gave discounts for sending in old gear, and launched a sustainability pledge. I didn't just want to be a store. I wanted to build a movement around reusing and reviving high-quality coffee gear. In 2022, I got a cold email from a PE-backed e-commerce roll-up. I ignored it. Then they emailed again, with actual numbers. They were rolling up niche DTC brands in food and beverage. I wasn't interested in selling, until they offered me 7x EBITDA and a cash-out deal that would let me walk away with low 7 figures. I had a long talk with Jake, the roaster. He reminded me why I started. Freedom, curiosity, not chasing some exit. But he also said, "You build a machine, man. It's okay to hand off the keys." So I sold. I stayed on for 6 months as a transition consultant. Then I walked away. I traveled a bit. Went to Italy. Took a coffee class in Florence. Came back to California and started volunteering at a nonprofit that teaches culinary skills to former inmates. Today, I still drink espresso every morning on a $40 machine I found at a Goodwill and restored myself. I don't miss the grind, but I'm grateful for every shot it took to get here. My story isn't glamorous. I didn't invent a new tech platform or sell a company for millions. But I did start with absolutely nothing and eventually built something that now feeds over a dozen families, including mine. I'm 34 now, and this whole thing started when I was 25, broke, and angry at everything. Back in 2016, I was working in a call center. Not even a cool one, if there is such a thing. Just a grim, soul-sucking place where people yell at you about bank charges and overdraft fees. I had a degree in marketing, but no experience, and the economy in my town was garbage. Rent took up 70% of my paycheck, and I'd eat whatever was on clearance at the grocery store. I had maybe $600 in savings on a good day. One weekend, I visited my cousin, who had just moved back from Austin and brought back something that seemed completely random at the time, a box of fancy hot sauces. We tried a few while eating grilled chicken, and I made some dumb joke like, "Man, people really spend $12 on this stuff?" My cousin, who's a lot more, why not, than me, said, "Dude, you should make your own. Sell it online. People eat this stuff up." I laughed. I didn't cook. I could barely afford groceries. But the idea stuck in my head. That night, I stayed up until 3 a.m. Googling how to make hot sauce. Peppers, vinegar, salt, fermenting, bottling. It wasn't rocket science. There was this entire online community of DIY hot sauce people, and I fell into a rabbit hole. I ordered some cheap supplies off eBay, mason jars, bottles, gloves, and a bunch of dried peppers. All in, I spent about $120, which felt like a lot at the time. My first batch was god-awful. It tasted like battery acid, but I kept at it. I tweaked ratios, learned about fermentation timing, tried roasting the peppers first. After 3 months, I had something that actually tasted decent. I gave some to my coworkers. One guy offered to buy a bottle for $5. That was the first money I made. Over the next few months, I made more batches in my tiny apartment kitchen. I started documenting the process on Instagram with this ironic branding I called Scorched Earth. My roommate helped me design a label. It was cheesy, black and red, with flames and a skull. But it popped. I opened an Etsy store. Sales trickled in, maybe one a week. I reinvested every dollar back into ingredients and packaging. On weekends, I'd hit the local farmer's market with a little folding table and a printed banner. Most people walked right past, but a few stopped. A few bought. I remember one Saturday, I made $143 in cash and felt like I'd won the lottery. By mid-2017, I was selling maybe 40 bottles a month. Still working at the call center, still broke, but I had a little spark of hope. The turning point came from a weird place, a Facebook post. A guy I barely knew from college shared a video of someone reviewing spicy foods, tagging a bunch of brands. I messaged the reviewer and offered to send him a few bottles for free. He actually replied. 2 weeks later, the guy posted a video featuring Scorched Earth. He said it melted his face in the best way. That video got about 12,000 views, and I woke up the next day to 86 Etsy orders. I didn't have enough stock. I spent the next 48 hours making hot sauce, filling bottles, handwriting thank you notes. That was the start. From that point on, I treated it like a real business. I set up a Shopify store. I tracked customer emails. I bought better labels, hired a designer to redo my logo, which was still a flaming skull, but way more polished. I experimented with small batch limited flavors and gave them names like Ghost Protocol and Carolina Collapse. Sales climbed. By early 2018, I was moving 500 bottles a month. But I hit a ceiling. I couldn't produce enough from my apartment. The place stank of vinegar and chilies. Neighbors complained. So I rented space in a shared commercial kitchen. That cost me almost all my profits, but it gave me legitimacy. I got certified, started selling wholesale to a few local gourmet shops. I was still working my job, still answering phones. But I had a goal now, quit and go full-time. That happened in 2019. I remember the exact moment. It was a Tuesday. My boss yelled at me over some customer dispute. I walked out, didn't even clear my desk. I had saved about $9,000 from sauce sales and took the leap. That year was hard. I lived on ramen and rode a beat-up bicycle because I couldn't afford car repairs. But I grew Scorched Earth to 2,000 bottles a month. I got into a regional grocery chain. I launched a Kickstarter to fund better packaging, and we raised $28,000. In 2020, when COVID hit, I thought I was screwed. The farmers' markets shut down. Retail sales dipped. But online sales exploded. Everyone was cooking at home and looking for something interesting. I hired 2 part-time people to help. We tripled our volume. I partnered with a local brewery on a spicy beer collab that got us on a local TV segment. By 2021, I had a real company. 5 employees, a 2,000-square-foot production facility, and distribution in 3 states. We added a subscription box and launched a line of spicy snacks. We crossed $750K in revenue that year. The next year, we hit $1.2 million. I pay myself $85K now, which feels surreal after the call center days. I drive a used but reliable truck. We offer health insurance to our team. And every Friday, we all eat lunch together, usually something spicy, of course. I get emails from people all over the world who discovered Scorched Earth from a friend or saw our ridiculous TikToks. We've shipped to 27 countries. The logo has changed, but it's still got a flaming skull. I can't bring myself to let it go. We're not trying to be the next Tabasco. I don't want to sell to a conglomerate. I just want to keep building this weird, spicy, glorious little empire that gave me a way out of hopelessness. People ask me now what the secret was. Honestly, it was stubbornness. I kept going when it didn't make sense. I believed in something before it really existed. And I found something people loved, not just a product, but a vibe, a brand, a flavor they could brag about. So no, I didn't start a tech startup. I just made hot sauce until it changed my life. I never meant to become an entrepreneur. Honestly, I was on track to become the most average corporate drone imaginable. My name's Josh, and until 5 years ago, my biggest ambition was maybe making middle management at the telecom company I worked for. Back then, I was 29, living in a small apartment in Charlotte, North Carolina, with a roommate I barely saw and a cat that hated me. I was doing okay, not great, just okay. And then I got fired. Downsized, technically. One Friday morning, my boss called me in, said something about strategic restructuring, and that was it. 7 years at the company, gone in 7 minutes. I spent the next 3 months in a fog. I applied to every vaguely relevant job on LinkedIn and Indeed. I sent over 200 resumes. I got 3 interviews, no offers. I was hemorrhaging savings and ordering way too much Taco Bell. Then one day, while half watching YouTube and doom-scrolling Reddit, I came across a niche subreddit called r/trash to cash. People were flipping discarded furniture, old electronics, even broken appliances, and making real money. I thought it was a scam, or at best, one of those, works for them, not for me things. But I kept reading. That night, I couldn't sleep. At 2 a.m., I got in my car and drove to a strip of dumpsters behind a row of apartment buildings. Don't ask me why. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was curiosity. I don't know. But I found an old nightstand, solid wood, ugly as hell, but sturdy. I took it home, cleaned it, sanded the top, stained it a darker walnut, and replaced the knob with one I found in a drawer. I posted it on Facebook Marketplace for $60. It sold in 4 hours. That $60 felt like $6000. It wasn't just the money, it was the realization that I could make something. Add value. That's addictive. So I did it again. And again. Over the next 2 months, I turned my apartment into a maze of half-finished chairs, tables, and old lamps. I learned how to use a jigsaw and a soldering iron from YouTube. My cat hated the noise. My roommate moved out. I didn't care. By month 5, I was making more flipping furniture than I ever did at the telecom company. But I was burning out. I worked 14-hour days and smelled like wood stain. I needed to scale. So I posted an ad on Craigslist, looking for discarded furniture. We'll pick up. I offered to clear out old garages and basements for free. Within a week, I had more inventory than I could handle. I hired a kid named Malik from my building to help with pickups. He was 19, smart, and needed a job. I paid him in cash at first, then hourly, then salary. He brought in his cousin, who could paint like a pro. Then we got a proper storage unit. Then 2. Then a workshop. Within a year, I was employing 6 people full-time and had a legit LLC, Urban Reclaim. We weren't just flipping junk anymore. We were making custom pieces from reclaimed materials. Old barn doors became coffee tables. Broken pianos became bookshelves. Our stuff started getting attention on Instagram. Interior designers reached out. We did a pop-up market in Raleigh and sold out in 3 hours. I was still living in a crappy apartment, but my company was pulling in $20,000 a month. That's when I made my first big mistake. I got cocky. I took out a $50,000 small business loan to open a showroom downtown. Rent was ridiculous, but I wanted the exposure. I imagined foot traffic, influencers, viral videos. But I didn't account for the construction on the street that lasted 6 months or the fact that people don't impulse buy $900 desks on their lunch break. Within 4 months, we were bleeding money. I was stressed, angry, snapping at my team. Malik almost quit. I had to shut the showroom down and break the lease. It cost me almost $30K and my pride. But it taught me something. Scale doesn't mean physical space. It means systems. So I restructured everything. We moved back to a warehouse on the outskirts of town, started doing 80% of our sales online, and leaned hard into the green design trend. TikTok helped too. We posted a 30-second video of turning a busted dresser into a bar cart. It got 2.4 million views. Orders tripled that month. Fast forward to today. We've got a 12-person team, an e-commerce site with custom orders, and partnerships with 3 eco-conscious retailers. We're profitable, bootstrapped, and completely independent. We still dumpster dive sometimes, though now it's more strategic. We know what sells. My cat still hates me, but he lives in a much nicer apartment now. I'm not rich. I don't drive a Tesla. But I wake up every day with purpose, and that's worth more than any paycheck I ever got sitting in a cubicle answering emails for someone else's dream. Sometimes I think about the night I found that ugly nightstand. How something so ordinary led me here. There's something poetic about that. If you're in a rut, maybe don't go digging through trash. But don't ignore what pulls your curiosity. It might just be your first step towards something big. So I accidentally started a $1 million company from my garage because I was too stubborn to throw away a broken coffee grinder. This all started about 4 years ago. I was 28, unemployed, recently dumped, and living in my parents' old house that they had left to me. I had about $30,000 to my name and no real plan except trying to freelance doing product photography. That didn't exactly pan out since everyone wanted exposure in return for high-res photos. So I spent most of my time drinking way too much coffee and browsing Craigslist for free junk I could maybe flip. One day, my trusty burr grinder, something I had bought used, of course, finally gave out. It made a horrible grinding noise and then just stopped spinning. I took it apart hoping for a quick fix, but it was toast. Still, something in me didn't want to just toss it. Maybe it was the caffeine or the sheer boredom, but I spent the next 36 hours figuring out how it worked. I watched a dozen YouTube repair videos, learned about burr geometry, RPMs, torque, stuff I never thought I'd care about. I found that a lot of people complained about how even expensive grinders often had inconsistent grind sizes or clogged easily. So I started wondering, what if I just made a better one? Not from scratch, obviously. I wasn't an engineer. But what if I just modded one? I went back to Craigslist and picked up 4 broken grinders, same model, all free. I cannibalized parts and Frankenstein together one working unit that actually produced a consistent, fluffy grind. Better than my original ever had. I posted it in a coffee subreddit just to show it off and got maybe 100 upvotes. But more importantly, I got messages. Like, a lot of messages. People wanted to know how I did it. Could I fix theirs? Could I build one for them? I laughed. I barely knew what I was doing. But one guy offered me $200 to replicate the mod. So I did. Then another. And another. Soon I had a spreadsheet just to keep track of orders. I called the business grind right, which I thought sounded just legit enough to not scream one guy in a garage. My first actual product was a fully modded grinder, same base model, but with new burrs, a gear ratio change, and 3D printed internal supports I made using a $300 printer I picked up from a liquidation sale. The cost of the parts was around $70, and I sold them for $240. The first month, I sold 8 units. The second month, 17. By month 4, I was selling 40 units a month and had to hire a high school kid down the street to help with packing and sanding. All this was run out of my garage, which I turned into a little workshop. My bedroom smelled like epoxy, I had coffee grounds in my shoes, and I was the happiest I'd been in years. Then came the first real challenge. Someone reported me. Apparently, I was reselling a modified product using a brand name I didn't own. Technically, they weren't wrong. I was using salvaged units from a well-known coffee appliance brand, and I was listing my mods on Etsy and eBay using the model name. So I pivoted. Fast. I started sourcing generic grinders directly from a manufacturer in Shenzhen. I designed my own burrs, with help from a mechanical engineer I found on Fiverr, and within 6 months, I launched the GrindRite V1, a totally custom product, no longer a mod. The design was simple, minimalist, and over-engineered to hell. My margins dropped to about 25%, but I had control now. And that's when things really exploded. A popular YouTuber in the coffee world, no idea how he found me, reviewed the V1 and called it the best bang-for-buck grinder on the market. He even said it performed better than models 5x the price. Overnight, my tiny Shopify store went from 3 to 5 orders a day to 150 in a single weekend. I ran out of stock in 48 hours. I panicked, but I used the cash flow to do my first actual manufacturing run, 500 units, which sold out in 2 weeks. By the end of that year, I had done $480,000 in revenue. Year 2? $1.3 million. I moved operations to a small warehouse. I hired a customer support rep, my cousin, a proper engineer, not from Fiverr this time, and even a marketing guy who used to do ads for a small kitchen appliance company. You'd think this would be the happily ever after part, but no. Year 3 nearly killed us. A competitor, an actual big brand, ripped off our V1 design and flooded the market with a cheaper, mass-produced clone. Sales plummeted. I had 3,000 unsold units in a warehouse and only $40,000 left in the bank. So I did what I always did, went back to the garage, metaphorically this time. I sketched out an entirely new design. A burr grinder with a magnetically suspended chamber, don't ask, ultra-quiet operation, and app-controlled grind presets. I called it the V2 and launched it as a Kickstarter. Goal $50,000. Raised $540,000 in 31 days. That money saved the company. We fulfilled every backer's order, and the V2 became a hit in its own right. By then, we weren't just surviving, we were a real brand. I even got approached by a VC firm, but I declined. I liked being lean and weird and, frankly, in control. Last year, we hit $3.2 million in revenue with a team of 11. And all of it, started with one broken coffee grinder I was too stubborn to throw out. So yeah, I guess I'm an entrepreneur now. But if you had told me 4 years ago that I'd make my living obsessing over burr alignment and gear reduction ratios, I would have told you to lay off the caffeine. Funny how life grinds out. I never thought I'd become that guy, the one who quit his stable job, blew through his savings, started a business out of his garage, and somehow turned it into something people actually use and pay for. But here we are. I'm the founder of a small, bootstrapped SaaS company with 12 employees, growing steadily with MR just crossing $83K. This is the story of how I got here, from overconfident disaster to cautious optimism. 2 years ago, I was a mid-level product manager at a fairly large fintech startup. The job was fine. The pay was decent. But every time I sat in a meeting debating font sizes and roadmap timelines, something in me itched. I kept thinking, I could build something better. That delusion is probably what gets most of us into this mess. Anyway, I had this nagging idea for a platform that solved a real problem I'd experienced firsthand. Small businesses struggling to manage recurring billing for their customers without getting locked into huge, bloated systems like Salesforce or Zuora. I called it Bill Pilot. Yes, the name sucks. No, I haven't changed it. People remember it, and that's enough. I started building it on nights and weekends. My co-founder, a back-end engineer I met at a hackathon years ago, agreed to help in exchange for equity. For 7 months we coded in silence, mostly fueled by cold brew and misplaced confidence. Our MVP was ugly but functional. We launched quietly in a couple of small Slack communities. And nothing happened. I mean nothing. One guy signed up, poked around, and never came back. I emailed him to ask why. He said, "It's confusing, and I don't know what it's supposed to do." Brutal, but fair. That's when I realized we hadn't validated anything. We built what we thought people wanted, not what they actually needed. So we paused. I took 2 weeks off work and just interviewed potential users, literally cold emailing small business owners and offering them a Starbucks gift card to talk to me for 30 minutes. I did 41 interviews. Here's what I learned. Most of our target users didn't care about half the features we built. They were using spreadsheets or cobbled-together Stripe dashboards, and their main concern was sending reliable recurring invoices and tracking late payments. That's it. They didn't need analytics. They didn't need automation rules. They needed simple. So we scrapped the MVP and rebuilt a stripped-down version focused on 3 things: create recurring invoices, track when someone doesn't pay, and send automated reminders. We kept the UI ridiculously clean. No more dashboard widgets. No AI-driven forecasting. Just billing that worked. 3 months later, we launched again, this time on Product Hunt and a few niche Facebook groups for local service businesses. The response wasn't overwhelming, but it was real. 112 people signed up in the first week. 34 became paying users. We charged $15/month. That was $510 MRR. It was the first time I'd ever made money from software that wasn't a freelance gig or client project. I still remember calling my mom and telling her someone in Ohio had paid $15 for something I made in my garage. She didn't really get what it was, but she was proud. From there, things got gritty. Support requests came in constantly. The payment system broke twice. We accidentally double-billed someone and had to refund them and offer a free month. But people kept using it. And word started to spread, mostly because we did one thing well: we cared. I answered every email personally. I offered Zoom onboarding for anyone who wanted help. I started a user Slack and hung out in it all day, just talking to customers. I asked for feedback obsessively and shipped new features weekly. Around month 6, we hit $4,000 MRR. That's when I did the stupidest and smartest thing I've ever done. I quit my job. I had about $23K in savings, no kids, no mortgage. I figured I had 6 months to make it work full-time or go crawling back to a real job. Those 6 months were hell. I worked 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. I got shingles. I stopped dating. I nearly lost my co-founder because I was so controlling. But we crossed $10K MRR, then $15K. We hired our first support person, then a part-time marketing contractor. We got our first annual prepay from a customer in Australia for $720, and I literally cried. There was a moment about 14 months in when I almost gave up. Growth stalled. Churn crept up. A competitor launched with a free plan that undercut us hard. I remember standing in the shower, just staring at the wall, feeling like I was drowning in my own ambition. But I got lucky. One of our early users, who ran a small bookkeeping firm, emailed me asking if she could refer a few clients to us in exchange for a kickback. I said sure, 20% recurring commission. She brought in 6 clients the first week, then 12. Then she asked if we could add a feature for multi-account management. That's when it hit me. Our ideal customer wasn't just small business owners. It was the people who serve them: bookkeepers, accountants, agency ops managers. We doubled down on that niche and rewrote our homepage to target them specifically. It worked. Growth picked back up. Today we have 2,100 paying users. Our lowest plan is $15/month. Our highest is $129. About 40% of our revenue now comes from partners using our platform to manage billing for multiple clients. We added a few integrations, QuickBooks, Zapier, MailChimp, and every time we ship something useful, we get a spike in signups. I still run things lean. No office. Remote team. We're profitable. We've had a few acquisition offers, but nothing life-changing yet. I'm not trying to build a unicorn. I just want to build a business that pays people well, helps customers, and doesn't make me hate Mondays. What I've learned. Ideas are cheap. Execution is expensive. Listening is underrated. Ego kills startups faster than failure. And no one cares about your logo. They care if your product makes their life easier. If you're thinking of starting something, do it. But do it small. Do it patiently. Build something someone needs now, not something you wish they wanted. And when things get hard, because they will, remember that it's okay to cry, to scream into a pillow, to take a break. But don't quit. Not yet. You might be 3 bug fixes away from someone in Ohio paying you $15 for the first time. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.